Hello, I'm Rena, and I am the developer of the Reading Great program. We're here today to talk about how to teach Reading Great. We're going to start with what is Reading Great, then we're going to touch on the components of Reading Great, and then we're going to spend the bulk of our time talking about what you should be doing in the classroom. So, Reading Great. What is Reading Great? Reading Great is a program to develop the students' reading and speaking skills. The program uses sight sentences to expose the students to everyday English expressions. And the vocabulary is interchangeable, allowing students to use a word in a variety of sentence structures. Now, what are sight sentences? Sight sentences are commonly used sentences in the English language. Reading Great uses the question and answer approach so students become comfortable speaking. Now, the components of Reading Great. Level 1, you have 2 sets of sight sentences, a warm-up, 3 storybooks, reading practices, speaking practices, and a role play, and wrap up. Level 2, again, 2 sets of sight sentences, warm-up, 1 storybook, reading practices, speaking practices, storytelling, and wrap up. We're going to break down these components of Reading Great in more detail in the later slides. Now, let's talk about how to teach the Reading Great program. We're going to start with Reading Great Level 1, and I'm using Unit 1 as a sample. Quick note, this program does not have a physical book. So it's very important that you prepare the materials for each unit's activity. Not only do you need the materials for the current month's unit, but previous month's materials can and should be carried over throughout the entire program. So let's start with day 1. As you can see, we have a class guide and a teacher's guide. Teacher's guide is your information that you need to look at during your prep time to know what to do during class. The teacher's guide should not be used in the classroom. That's why I've created a class guide, and we're going to see how they differ. So, warm up. Warm up for level 1 is a song, and for each unit, they're going to do 3 songs every 4 days. And each of these songs have to do with the theme of the unit. And when you're playing these songs for the kids should never be sitting at their table or on the floor. They need to be up and active during these songs, acting out actions, trying their best to sing along or listen and repeat with what the song is doing. And you guys need to know what this song is before walking into the classroom. Next, for day 1, you're going to introduce the new material. And new material and speaking practices are kind of similar, and they focus on the students learning the sight sentences of the unit, as well as the vocabulary that goes with those sight sentences. You will be using the materials during each of the activities set for these days. Depending on the class size depends on how long these games and activities can go. So if you have a smaller class, those activities are going to probably go a little bit quicker than say a class with a larger size. So as a teacher, you need to familiarize yourselves with the activities that are set for the day, as well as know what you can do to maybe change it up if you repeat the game, or prepare a second activity, which I have a manual for you guys to refer to, and have that backup game in case you need it, because you still have a good chunk of time. I should have mentioned earlier that all Reading Great classes are 40 minutes each. With the warm-up should be at most 5 minutes, typically the length of one of the songs that I've chosen for class. You're more than welcome to repeat it, but don't repeat it more than twice, because you want to spend the bulk of the class period on the reading and speaking practices. So let's go back into this. Next, reading practices. Day 1, day 5, and day 9 are the most important days when it comes to reading. Each of these days introduce the storybooks to the class. For level 1, we have 3 storybooks, and they're going to spend 4 days on each of those storybooks. Book 1 introduces the first set of sight sentences. Book 2 introduces the second set of sight sentences. And then Book 3 combines both sets of sight sentences and has a little bit more of a storyline to them. Now, on these days, you should begin with a picture walk. You should be pointing out the characters and what they're doing in the story. Here, you can use the sight sentences to prompt the students during the picture walk so they can guess what's happening in the pictures. Next, the teacher-led reading. I want you guys to think about the teachers you had in the past that were so great at reading a story to you, or your own parents reading stories to you. I want you to try your best to be the most amazing storyteller to your kids. The more animated and engaged you are, the more the kids are also going to be engaged during this part. Then the last part is choral reading. You can do this a couple of different ways. The kids could just choral with you, so they're reading at the same time you're reading, and you want them to follow your intonation and your pacing. Depending on the level of your students, your pacing could be quite slow, but if they're a little bit higher level and they're catching on quickly, you can speed up their pace of reading. Please do not be a robotic reader with these kids. You want them to learn to change that tone of voice. This is important for when they practice their speaking. The other way you could do this is a listen and repeat reading, but at the same time, when they're repeating after you, you want them to match your intonation, match your pace, and match your vibe as you're reading these stories. Now, the last part of the class is the wrap-up. I call it 30-second wrap-up because you can give the kids maybe 30 seconds each to talk about any words that they've learned. You can actually, this is a great moment to kind of check the students' progress at the end of each class. Since Reading Great is all about these sight sentences, you can have a one-on-one moment with each of the kids, asking them those sight sentences and see if they're able to answer you. A very important material with the Reading Great are the flashcards, which are available for you to print and have ready for the class. During wrap-up, it's a great time to use those flashcards because you could hand out a flashcard to each of the kids. And when you go around and check them, you can see that they understand the sight sentence as well as the vocab word. Now, I'm not expecting the kids to read the word on the flashcard, but I am expecting them to recognize that flashcard because you use them during the intro to new material and also the speaking practices. Now, at the end of the class period, if you have any time left over, repeat the song from the beginning of the class or, read the story again. But really try and see what the kids learn during the class and do that check-in with each of the kids. Now, we're going to talk about days 2 through 4 of a Reading Great Level 1 class. I just want to repeat again that the warm-up and the wrap-up are the same for every day of this class. So I'm not going to go into about the song and the wrap-up at the end. So, with Reading Great 2 through 4, you're going to begin the class with a reading practice. The reading practice for days 2 through 4 begin with a choral reading, just like you did on day 1. The students can read along with you, matching your pace and intonation, or you could do a listen and repeat kind of reading practice. The next reading practice that you're going to do on days 2 through 4 is split reading. Split reading is taking the class and splitting it into 2 groups. And one group is in charge of reading one sentence, and the other group is in charge of reading the other sentence. And you read through the storybooks once, with them reading their designated sentences, and then you switch their sentences and go through it once again. That's typically reading the book about 3 times during these class periods. Then the speaking practices. Speaking practices are always games, and you definitely need to have those flashcards prepared in advance for these games because they're used in almost every single game as a key component for these games. And I mentioned earlier when we were talking about day one, these games could go quite quickly depending on your class size and also depending on the level of your students. Familiarize yourselves with the rules of these games so you know them frontwards and backwards and left to right, and then know how you can extend that game to make it longer by changing up a rule or even preparing a backup activity which you will have access to. So then there's no time for the kids to idle between activities. You really want them speaking as much as possible during these speaking practices, using those sight sentences. So day 5 follows a similar flow to day 1. There are just a few differences. There's a new song. The intro to new material will focus on the second set of sight sentences. And day 5 introduces the second storybook of the unit. So you're going to begin with that picture walk, teacher reading, and then choral reading. And then you're going to wrap it up just like I've already explained. So let's touch on days 6 through 8. Again, just like days 2 through 4, you'll begin with a choral reading during the reading practices. But the practices used after the choral reading will change month by month. During this second part of the reading practice, after the choral reading, the student should have a chance to read a sentence or more from the story. Repeat these reading practices so the students get the chance to read. No student should have finished a reading practice without a chance to read. Then, speaking practices. These practices, once again, are done like days 2 through 4. But during these games, try to include both sets of sight sentences when playing the games. And just like I previously stated, if the game is done too quickly, either play the game again while changing a rule or have a backup game. Now, let's focus on the last 4 days of the unit, which are the most important parts of the unit. Day 9 begins with the song and chant. It's a new song and chant. Again, students should never be sitting during the song and chant. They need to be up and singing or trying to sing and dancing with actions, if they can do actions, or anything as long as they are not sitting down. Then, reading practices. They're introduced to the third and final storybook of the unit. You need to do that picture walk. You need to do your teacher-led reading, using those storytelling abilities to make it fun and interesting for the kids. And then, choral reading as a class. Now, the bulk of the lesson should be on prepping the students to perform a role play. And they will be working on it from day 9 to day 12. There are role play videos provided for each unit. The teacher should watch and be aware of what happens in the video before the class. Show the role play video first with the sound muted and get the students to guess what is happening. Use those sight sentences of the unit to coax the students to answer. Next, show the video with sound. Play it more than once if needed if the students don't catch the dialogue the first time. After showing the video, check with the students if they understood the dialogue in the video. Once you've finished reviewing the videos, look for students volunteers to come up and act out the video in front of the class. If time allows, have more than one group perform. So, at the end of day 9, what you should have done is, like I said, show those videos and have the kids act out those videos. It's to get them comfortable with getting up in front of the class and performing. And then, of course, wrap it up, play the song again, or take that time, hand out flashcards if you need to, and check in with each of the students, seeing if they know these sight sentences of the unit. I'll take a moment here and say that we're using Unit 1 as a sample right now. But as you move through each of the units, throw the kids a curveball and ask them different sight sentences from previous units so they see if they remember those sight sentences and can use that vocabulary in more than one way. So now we're on day 10. We're going to start with the warm-up and then we're going to go right into the reading. Of course, as always, start the class with a choral read. Now, starting from day 10, 11, and 12, you should really have your co-teacher recording as much of the classes as possible. Because, for instance, on day 10, 11, and 12, after doing that choral reading, you want student volunteers to come up and read the entire storybook to the class. This is a great moment to record so you can track progress, send those videos to parents so they can see what they're doing in these Reading Great classes. Depending on your class size, I want you to spend about 10-15 minutes during the reading practices on these days. So, limit the number of student volunteers to maybe 3. You should be able to get 3 in during that 10-minute period, hopefully. And from day 10, 11, and 12, by day 12, every single student should have had a chance to independently read the storybook to the class. Now, I will take a moment and say that if you have a student in your class that is so painfully shy that they are terrified to get up in front of the class and do something like this, of course, you should not pressure them to do something like that because it's just going to make them shut down and give up on English, really. If they're more comfortable maybe doing it with a friend, of course, allow that to happen. As a teacher, ask if they want to do it with you so they're not embarrassed. But just try your best to get as many kids as possible to read the stories themselves. And of course, use that positive reinforcement for everything, regardless of if they make a mistake or anything like that. Just always give them that positive vibe so they're having fun and are happy in the class. Now, the bulk of the class for day 10 should be spent on practicing for the role play. How you're going to do this. First, you're going to review with that role play video. Then, you're going to look for student volunteers to once again try and act out that video. Try and have a different group of kids come up if possible, since some kids had already had the chance on day 9. Then, you're going to split the class into groups that can facilitate a role play. I've designated how many members should be in a group, but then again, I don't know your class sizes. So you might not be able to make a group of 4 because you only have 4 kids in the class. If that's the case, then have a group of 2 kids in each role play group. Next, create characters for them. You can copy the role play video. If in the role play video you have a teacher and students, have a student act as the teacher and the other kids in the group act as the students. But give them kind of a designated role. Then, here's a very important part of the role play and what you're going to do for all the units. You need those flashcards. I cannot say that enough. You need those flashcards. Because even though they're all going to be saying the same sentences, by using those flashcards, they're going to have different sentences because that vocabulary changes. So give the kids a chance to choose their flashcards. For instance, for Unit 1, they spend learning emotions and actions. So they're going to choose an emotion card and they're going to choose an action card. And then that means every kid has a different sentence they're going to say. Yes, the bulk of the sentence is going to be the same, but that fill in the blank part of the sentence is going to be different for each kid. Then, after they've chosen their flashcards, you should be checking and making sure that they can create the sentences with those flashcards. Now, day 11. Again, choral reading. Choral read with the kids, and then independent read. Any kid who wants to volunteer to read who has not read yet. No one gets to read twice during this. It just takes too much time. Have your independent readers read, record those readings, and then move on into the second practice of the role play. Once again, review with the role play video so the kids can kind of see like what the characters in the videos are doing and how they're acting in those videos. Then put them back in their groups. Check in to see who's the character, and then if they don't remember what their flashcard was that they chose on day 10, give them back their flashcards now. Then let the groups practice. You want them to act out their sentences. So for instance, for Unit 1, we have emotions and actions. I don't want a kid saying, I'm happy, I'm running. That's not what they should be doing. They should be, I'm happy, I'm running. They should be emotional and active during the role play. None of them should have their back leaning against the board with their hands behind their backs. I see it all the time. They should not be doing that. Then give them a chance to come up and practice. And then you can point out those little things. So if someone is up there and saying, I'm angry, you can stop them and say, is that angry? Is that what angry sounds like? And have fun with them. Don't put them on the spot or anything like that, but you want them to have fun and be silly and really be hams in this role play. You want them to be caricatures of themselves. Finally, day 12. Again, like I said, same reading practice, choral, independent read. By the time independent reading finishes on this day, every kid has had a chance to read the storybook themselves. Then, day 12 is when they get to perform that role play. Take a few minutes at the beginning of this time to put the kids in their groups, check in with them, let them practice a little bit. Then, if you have any props, masks, or costumes that are available, allow the students to use them. Make this really fun and let them just kind of have some freedom to be creative here. Then, after that, allow each group to come up and act out their role play. Record it. This is a way you can track progress and also send to the parents so they can see what's going on. And then allow every group a chance to perform during this time. And that's Reading Great Level 1, days 1 through 12.